The story begins on a quiet evening in Los Angeles. A film event was being held inside a grand hall filled with lights, red carpets, and cameras flashing from every corner. People expected action, glamour, and big speeches. But no one expected the true action of the night to come, not from the screen, but from real life. Inside that hall were two men who had lived very different journeys, but shared something powerful. Steven Seagal, known for his strength, martial arts, and unshakable presence, sat in one corner. Keanu Reeves, known for his humility, calm nature, and quiet smile, stood on the other side. The crowd looked at them as stars, but neither man thought of himself that way. They both believed true strength was not about fame or power, but about kindness. The hook came when the music suddenly stopped. A staff member, a young man, barely 20, slipped while carrying a tray filled with glasses. The crash echoed across the hall. The glasses shattered. Silence followed. All eyes turned. The young man froze, embarrassed, fear filling his face. He was afraid that everyone would laugh at him or his job might be at risk. And then, something happened. Before anyone could whisper, Keanu Reeves calmly stepped forward. He bent down on the shining floor and started picking up the broken pieces with his own hands. People gasped. A Hollywood star, a global icon, on his knees gathering glass like any ordinary person. But Keanu was not alone. Steven Seagal, whose presence often made people step back in awe, also moved forward. He crouched next to Keanu, his strong hand steadying the young man's shaking fingers. "Don't worry," Seagal said softly. "Mistakes happen to all of us." The young man's eyes filled with tears. The crowd remained silent. Not a single camera clicked, not a single phone recorded. People were too moved to act. In that moment, the hall became a classroom of humanity. Two men who had seen fame, power, and battles on screen were teaching a simple lesson. True strength does not come from how many fights you win, but from how much kindness you can give when no one expects it. As Keanu helped pick up the last pieces, he smiled at the staff member and said, "You are not alone. Every hand in this room can help you if we just remember to care." The boy nodded, his face turning from fear to hope. Steven placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Stand tall," he said, "because dignity is not lost in a fall. It is found when you rise again." Suspense filled the air. People began whispering. Some were inspired, some were shocked, and some were even ashamed for not moving first. The night had begun as a show of movies, but now it was a story of humanity that no one would forget. As the event continued, the crowd kept glancing at Keanu and Steven. They didn't return to the spotlight. They sat quietly, humble as always, as if nothing unusual had happened. But deep inside, the hall had changed. People had seen a truth that glitter and fame often hide. This was only the beginning, because the real test of their kindness was still to come. There were challenges waiting beyond that hall, moments of conflict, hidden pain, and trials that would push them both to the edge. What they had done tonight was powerful, but the world outside was ready to ask them an even bigger question. How far can kindness truly go when tested by betrayal, loss, and fear? And so the journey began. A story not about fights on a screen, but about battles of the heart. The night after the event, the world outside the hall looked very different for the young staff member who had dropped the tray. His name was Daniel. He was not from a rich family, and this job was the only way he could support his mother who was sick at home. For weeks, he had carried fear inside him. Fear of losing his job, fear of not being good enough, fear of being invisible in a world that only saw stars. When the glasses shattered, Daniel thought his life was over. But the moment Steven Seagal and Keanu Reeves bent down to help him, something broke inside him, not his hope, but his fear. It was as if they had picked up the pieces of his courage, along with the broken glass. Yet outside the event, not everyone saw it that way. The news barely mentioned it. The cameras that had been pointed at them only caught flashes, and many editors thought it was not important enough. They wanted drama, not kindness. They wanted conflict, not compassion. But for those who were present in the hall, the moment lived in their hearts like fire. Whispers started to spread in the city. People said, "Did you hear what Keanu and Steven did?" Some laughed, some shrugged, but many felt a sting deep inside. Because the truth was, everyone in that hall had a chance to help Daniel, yet they had stayed frozen. And now two men, already admired by millions, had shown them the meaning of humility. The next day, Daniel returned to work. His supervisor called him in, expecting to fire him. But instead, she said, "I don't know what you did last night, but the two biggest names in the room stood by you. That means something. Keep working and don't let fear control you again." Daniel walked out with tears in his eyes, whispering to himself, "Kindness saved me." But while Daniel's story turned toward hope, something else was brewing. Both Steven Seagal and Keanu Reeves began to notice the weight of their actions. People started watching them differently. Some respected them more, but others, hidden in shadows, saw their kindness as weakness. A powerful producer known for his cold heart spoke behind closed doors. "This industry is built on image," he said. "Stars should look untouchable, larger than life. If they kneel on the floor like servants, they destroy the illusion." His words carried poison, and slowly, that poison spread. Soon offers that were once open to Steven began to close. Meetings that were once warm for Keanu turned quiet. It was as if the simple act of helping had shaken a system that thrived on pride and distance. But neither of them regretted it. One evening, they met in a quiet restaurant away from the city lights. Steven leaned back, his voice calm but firm. "We know what this is about. They don't want people to see us as human because then the world will demand humanity from them too." Keanu nodded slowly. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Maybe that's why we need to keep doing it. Maybe the only way to fight this system is not with fists, but with kindness so strong it cannot be ignored." Their conversation was interrupted when a woman approached their table. She was in her late 30s, with tired eyes and a hopeful smile. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, "but my brother was at the event last night. He told me how you helped that boy. My brother has been struggling with depression, and he said, if men like them can care about a stranger, maybe my life is worth something too. I just wanted you to know. You saved more than one life that night." The room fell silent again. But this time the silence was heavy with meaning. Steven and Keanu looked at each other, realizing that their small act had reached farther than they imagined. But they also knew that such acts came with a price. Kindness in a world built on pride often feels like rebellion, and rebellion always brings enemies. Later that night, as Steven walked to his car, a shadowy figure approached him. "You should stop," the man muttered. "Not everyone wants kindness to win. You'll make the wrong people angry." Steven did not flinch. He stared into the man's eyes and replied, "I have faced bullets, betrayal, and storms. If kindness makes enemies, then so be it, because I will not stop." What Steven did not know was that Keanu, too, was facing warnings from those who wanted him silent. His agent called and said, "People think you're too soft. They want a strong star, not someone kneeling on the ground." Keanu simply replied, "Strength without kindness is empty. I'd rather be forgotten than be remembered without a heart." Conflict was rising like a wave, but hidden beneath it was something even stronger, an unstoppable truth beginning to spread. People were tired of fake perfection. They were hungry for real humanity, and though danger circled them, Steven and Keanu were ready, because they had learned one thing already. True strength is not in avoiding storms, but in standing tall through them. The question was no longer if they would face resistance. The question was how far the storm would go, and what sacrifices kindness would demand of them next. Days turned into weeks, and the small moment of kindness at the event began to grow into something neither Steven nor Keanu had expected. People who had witnessed it could not stop talking. Quiet conversations in homes, schools, and offices carried the story. If men like them can bend down to help, what excuse do we have for ignoring the struggles around us? Teachers repeated it to students. Parents used it as an example for their children. Strangers wrote about it online, where the story spread silently but powerfully. Yet while the people felt inspired, those who held power in Hollywood grew uneasy. For them, the system was built on distance. Stars had to look untouchable. Producers and executives believed the image of perfection was what kept money flowing. Kindness to them looked like weakness. and weakness was dangerous. One night, Keanu received an invitation to a private meeting at a hotel. His agent insisted he attend, promising it would clear the air and bring him back into favor. When he entered the dimly lit room, he found 3 men waiting. They were producers, faces hard and voices sharper than knives. "We respect your career," one of them said coldly, "but we need to be clear. People don't pay to see humility. They pay to see strength, power, and control. You kneeling to help a staff boy. That image damages the industry. We cannot allow it to continue." Keanu looked at them quietly, his calm face hiding the storm inside him. "If your idea of strength is stepping over someone who has fallen," he said softly, "then it is not strength at all." The men exchanged glances. "Be careful," another warned. "Hollywood builds stars, but it can also bury them." Meanwhile, Steven was facing his own trial. He had always been seen as an unstoppable force, someone larger than life. But after his act of compassion, rumors began to spread. Some called him soft. Others whispered that he had lost the edge that once made him feared. During a filming session, a co-star muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear, "The great Seagal is now babysitting waiters." Laughter followed, but Steven's response was silence. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he walked over, placed a firm hand on the co-star's shoulder and said, "You'll understand one day that fear does not make you strong. Kindness does." The words silenced the room, but behind the silence was tension, and behind the tension was betrayal waiting to strike. The first twist came when Daniel, the young staff member they had once helped, suddenly disappeared from his job. Keanu tried to reach him, but his phone was disconnected. Days later, a letter arrived at Keanu's apartment with no name, just trembling handwriting. "They told me I was lucky that I still had work after the accident. They said if I ever spoke about what you did that night, I would lose everything. They threatened my mother's treatment. I'm sorry. I cannot fight them. Please forgive me." Keanu showed the letter to Steven. Both men felt a fire rising inside. It was no longer about image. It was about control, cruelty, and people being silenced for simply being helped. Steven clenched his fists. "They are punishing kindness because it threatens their power. This is not just about us anymore. This is about every ordinary person crushed under their pride." Keanu's voice was calm, but his eyes carried pain. "If Daniel has to suffer for what we did, then our responsibility has grown. We cannot walk away." And so a decision was made. They would not only continue showing kindness in public, they would make it their mission. They would expose the cruelty of those who thought compassion was weakness. But with that decision came danger. Soon, both men noticed they were being followed. Cars lingered outside their homes. Unknown callers left silent messages, and whispers reached them through friends. "Be careful. You are making enemies." Yet with every threat, their resolve grew stronger, because deep inside, they knew kindness is only proven when tested by darkness. The suspense deepened one rainy evening when Steven walked into a cafe to meet Keanu. As he entered, he noticed a man sitting in the corner with a newspaper held too high, hiding his face. Steven's instincts, sharpened from years of facing danger, told him the man was not just reading. When Steven sat across from Keanu, he leaned in and whispered, "We are being watched." Keanu glanced around slowly, his expression unchanged, and then spoke with calm clarity. "Then let them watch. Maybe it is time they see that kindness does not bow to fear." But just as he finished, the man in the corner stood up, walked past their table, and dropped a small envelope between them. Without a word, he left. Inside the envelope was a photo of Daniel. On the back, one sentence was written, "Stop your kindness or he will pay." The hall where it all began had been filled with silence after broken glass. But now, a darker silence hung over them, one filled with threat and shadow. The question that now burned between them was no longer whether kindness could survive mockery. It was whether kindness could survive when lives were placed at risk. The photo of Daniel rested between them on the cafe table, its edges slightly wet from the rain that had blown in through the open door. Both Steven and Keanu stared at it in silence, but their silence carried different weights. Steven's silence was heavy, sharp like a blade held back by discipline. Keanu's silence was calm but trembling with hidden pain, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. The words on the back of the photo, "Stop your kindness or he will pay," were not just a threat. They were a declaration of war. It was no longer about humiliation or mocking their compassion in front of cameras. Now it was about breaking them by targeting the very people they were trying to protect. Stephen's hand tightened into a fist. His eyes, usually calm, burned with a fire people rarely saw. "They think fear will make us retreat," he said, his voice low but powerful. "But fear is their weapon. Kindness is ours, and I will not let them take him." Keanu leaned back slightly, his voice soft but steady. "We must be careful. If we fight them with their methods, we will lose what makes us different. But if we do nothing, Daniel suffers. The question is, how do we fight darkness without letting it turn us into what we hate?" The cafe around them seemed unaware of the storm brewing at their small table. People laughed, coffee machines hissed, and rain tapped against the windows. But for Stephen and Keanu, the world had narrowed to a single choice: protect kindness at all costs, or watch it die in silence. The first step was to find Daniel. They split up, searching the few places he might run to. Stephen checked the old neighborhoods, talking to people on the streets, his tall figure and sharp eyes commanding both respect and honesty. Keanu took a different approach. He visited hospitals, shelters, and small diners, speaking gently to strangers, listening more than asking, hoping someone had seen the frightened young man. Hours turned into days. Every lead seemed to close into dead ends. But on the third night, Keanu found something. At a small diner near the edge of the city, a waitress recognized Daniel's photo. "He came here 2 nights ago," she whispered. He looked scared, kept checking the door. He left when 2 men in suits walked in. "I don't know where he went, but he dropped this." She handed Keanu a folded receipt. Written on it, in hurried handwriting, were 3 words: "They are watching." Keanu brought the note back to Stephen. When Stephen read it, he slammed his hand against the table, his voice breaking the calm. "Enough is enough. They want to play games with shadows, but shadows cannot hide from truth. We will find Daniel. We will protect him. And we will show them that kindness does not break. It only grows stronger under pressure." Keanu nodded, though his face showed the weight of the path ahead. "But remember, Stephen, strength must be guided by restraint. If we let anger lead us, they win. We must hold on to humility, even in the fight." Their search took them deeper into the underbelly of the city, where the shine of Hollywood disappeared and the alleys smelled of smoke and fear. They learned quickly that the threat was bigger than one producer or one shadowy figure. There was a network, a group of people who thrived on control, who believed fear was the only way to maintain power. The turning point came one night when Stephen confronted a man in a dark parking lot. The man had been following him for days. When Stephen cornered him, the man smirked. "You think you're saving that boy? He's already gone. People like us decide who rises and who falls. Your kindness means nothing." Stephen's jaw tightened, but instead of raising his fists, he spoke with a voice that shook the air. "You are wrong. Kindness always means something. It is the one thing you cannot bury because every time you try, it grows in someone else." The man's smirk faded. For the first time, he looked unsure. And in that crack of doubt, Stephen saw proof. Kindness was already winning, even in the enemy's eyes, but victory was far away. Keanu soon discovered that Daniel's mother had been moved to a private clinic under false paperwork. Someone was using her as leverage, and if they controlled her, they controlled Daniel. The revelation hit them both hard. Stephen's anger burned hotter than ever. Keanu's calm cracked with sorrow. "They are not just trying to silence us," Keanu whispered. "They are trying to break the spirit of every person who believes in compassion. If they succeed, this will not end with Daniel. It will spread." The rain poured harder that night as the 2 men stood outside the clinic gates, knowing they were stepping into a storm bigger than themselves. The fight was no longer about protecting a boy or defending their image. It was about proving to the world that kindness could stand against cruelty, even when cruelty played with lives. In that moment, Stephen looked at Keanu and said something that would stay with him forever. "We cannot save the world in one night, but we can save one life, and that is where real strength begins." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder, his eyes filled with quiet fire. Then let's begin here, tonight. The stage was set. The storm was rising, and kindness was about to be tested in ways neither of them had ever imagined. The rain poured heavily that night, falling in sheets that blurred the city lights and drowned the sound of footsteps. Stephen and Keanu stood outside the gates of the private clinic where Daniel's mother was being held. The building loomed in silence, its walls high and its windows dark, like a fortress built not to heal but to control. Stephen's eyes scanned the area with the sharpness of a man who had lived through many battles. His instincts told him there were eyes watching from the shadows. Keanu, calmer in his presence but no less determined, closed his eyes for a brief moment, centering himself. "We must go in with patience," he whispered. "If we rush in with anger, we will lose her." But patience was hard when lives were at stake. Daniel's mother, a gentle woman who had never harmed anyone, was being used as a pawn in a cruel game. She had become a prisoner not of her own choices, but of the arrogance of those who wanted to punish kindness itself. They moved quietly through the rain, slipping past the gates and into the narrow hallways of the clinic. The air inside smelled of medicine mixed with something darker, fear. The corridors were empty, but there was a weight in the silence, the kind of silence that hides danger. As they searched, they finally found her room. She was lying on a bed, pale and weak, with a small tube connected to her arm. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw them, and then tears rolled down her face. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They will hurt you. They will hurt Daniel." Keanu stepped forward, his calm voice soothing her. "We are here to take you out. No one deserves to be treated this way. Your son is safe in our hearts, and tonight we promise to keep you safe too." But before they could move her, the door behind them creaked open. Stephen turned instantly, his body ready for danger. A man entered, tall and dressed in a suit, his face hidden in the dim light. And then the first betrayal revealed itself. It was Daniel. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes filled with confusion and fear. He stepped into the room, followed by 2 guards. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I told you not to come. They promised me my mother would live if I stayed quiet. But now they will take her away forever." The room froze in a moment of heartbreak. Keanu looked at Daniel with deep sorrow, not anger. "You were forced, Daniel. They are using your love for her as chains. But love is not weakness, it is strength. Do not let them break you with it." The guards moved forward, but Stephen stepped in their way. His voice thundered. "Enough, no more threats. No more cruelty. If you want to face someone, face me. Leave the boy and his mother out of your war." The guards hesitated, sensing the fire in his stance. But the man in the suit raised a hand, signaling them to wait. His voice was calm, but every word dripped with arrogance. "You think kindness can win against power? You are fools. People don't follow humility. They follow fear. Fear is what keeps the world in line." Keanu shook his head, his calmness unbroken even in the face of threat. "Fear is temporary. Kindness lasts forever. You may silence one voice, but that kindness will live in another heart. It cannot die, no matter how hard you try." The man smirked, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a brief shadow of doubt. Still, he gave the order. "Take them!" Chaos erupted in the room. The guards lunged forward. Stephen's strength and skill came alive, his movements precise and controlled. He did not strike with anger, but with purpose, to protect, not to destroy. Keanu moved with calm agility, blocking blows, disarming hands, and shielding Daniel's mother. Daniel stood frozen, torn between fear and the sight of 2 men risking everything for him and his mother. His heart pounded as the truth burned inside him. These men were not weak. They were stronger than anyone he had ever seen, not because of their fists, but because of their refusal to give up their humanity even in battle. Within minutes, the guards lay disarmed on the floor. The man in the suit slipped out of the room, his smile gone, his arrogance shaken. Stephen and Keanu rushed to help Daniel's mother from the bed. Her hands trembled as she touched their faces. "Why would you do this for us?" she whispered. "We are nothing compared to you." Keanu's eyes softened, his voice gentle. "No one is nothing. Every life has value. If the world forgets that, it loses its soul. They carried her out through the storm, the rain soaking them, lightning cutting the sky. Each step felt heavy, not because of the danger, but because of the truth they had just uncovered. This fight was bigger than a single family, bigger than an industry. It was a war between fear and kindness, and the enemy would not stop with this defeat. As they reached safety, Daniel broke down in tears. "I betrayed you," he cried. "I listened to them because I was afraid, but you still saved me." Stephen knelt before him, his voice firm but full of compassion. "You did not betray us. Fear betrayed you, and we all face fear. What matters is what you choose now. Will you live in its shadow, or will you rise into the light of kindness?" Daniel nodded slowly, the weight of his choice pressing deep into his heart. And in that moment, a boy once broken by fear began to change. But unknown to them, the man in the suit was not finished. He was preparing a greater strike, one that would not target just Daniel or his mother, but the very hearts of the people who looked up to Seagal and Keanu. The battle had only begun, and the storm was far from over. The night they rescued Daniel's mother felt like a victory, but victory was short-lived. While Seagal and Keanu saw hope in Daniel's tearful eyes, the people pulling the strings were already planning their counterattack. The man in the suit, humiliated by his failed attempt to break them, knew he could not defeat them with force alone. So he chose a different weapon, public opinion. In a world where images spread faster than truth, he knew that twisting the story could be more powerful than any threat. Within days, false reports began to surface. News outlets suddenly ran stories claiming that Keanu and Stephen had staged the entire act of kindness at the gala. Some headlines said it was a publicity stunt to revive their careers. Others went further, accusing them of exploiting a young staff member for attention. Photos were doctored. Videos were edited to make their actions look rehearsed. Voices on talk shows mocked them. "They want to look like saints," one commentator sneered. "But in Hollywood, nothing is real." The betrayal stung. People who once whispered their names with respect now questioned their sincerity. Outside their homes, protesters shouted for answers. Strangers online wrote cruel words. The story of kindness that had inspired so many was being drowned by lies. Daniel, still shaken but growing stronger, watched the chaos unfold. Guilt pressed heavy on him. "This is my fault," he whispered to Stephen one evening. "If I had been stronger, if I hadn't let them use me, you wouldn't be suffering this now." Stephen placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice steady like stone. "Listen to me, Daniel. You are not the cause of this. The cause is fear and pride. They want to destroy what they don't understand. You cannot take blame for their cruelty." Keanu added gently, "When people doubt you, do not fight them with anger. Fight them with patience. Truth takes time, but it always rises. Our job is not to protect our names, but to protect the spirit of kindness itself." But the attacks grew heavier. Roles they had been promised disappeared. Projects were canceled. Friends turned cold, afraid to be seen with them. The price of kindness was becoming heavier than they imagined. One night, Stephen sat in silence in his living room, staring at the wall. His mind, so used to strength, now wrestled with doubt. "Maybe they are right," he said quietly when Keanu visited. "Maybe the world does not want kindness. Maybe people only respect power." Keanu looked at him with calm eyes. "Do you know why they fight us so hard? Because they fear kindness. They know if the world sees it for what it is, their control will vanish. The louder their lies, the closer we are to truth. Do not give up now." Their bond grew deeper in that darkness. They began to move quietly, helping people in secret. They visited shelters at night, provided food to families who had lost jobs, comforted strangers who had no one to listen. There were no cameras, no applause, no headlines, just silent acts of kindness that no one could twist. And slowly, something began to shift. Stories emerged not from the media, but from ordinary people. A homeless man whispered to a group of students, "They gave me a blanket on the coldest night." A nurse told her co-workers. They sat by a dying patient and held his hand for hours. A child smiled as she said, "They brought food when we had nothing." The lies of the powerful began to crack under the weight of real voices. But the fight was not over. The man in the suit returned, this time with a crueler plan. He knew he could not break Stephen and Keanu directly, so he aimed again at Daniel. One evening, Daniel was ambushed while leaving work. Bruised and frightened, he stumbled back to Stephen and Keanu's side. In his pocket was a message slipped to him during the attack. The next act of kindness will be your last. Walk away or watch everything you love burn. The threat was no longer hidden. The war was open, but instead of retreating, Keanu's calm voice grew even firmer. They want us to choose fear. We will choose courage. They want us to stay silent. We will choose truth. Because kindness that retreats is not kindness at all. It is only comfort. True kindness walks into fire. Stephen's eyes blazed, his strength steady. Then we walk into fire together. The stage was set for the greatest test yet. Kindness had carried them through broken glass, whispers, threats, and lies. But now it would face its most dangerous trial. An open confrontation with those who wanted it destroyed. The rain outside had stopped, but in the stillness, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was not gone. It was only waiting. The storm finally arrived. Not the storm of rain, but the storm of confrontation, where fear and kindness would collide with no shadows left to hide in. The threats had grown too loud to ignore. The man in the suit, backed by his powerful network, organized a public event. It was framed as a charity gala, but Stephen and Keanu knew the truth. It was a trap. They were invited not to be honored, but to be humiliated. The stage would be set, cameras everywhere, and the goal was clear: to paint them as frauds in front of the world. Stephen's instincts screamed of danger. We walk into their den, we may not walk out. Keanu's calm voice answered with steady fire. If we stay away, they win by silence. Sometimes the only way to prove truth is to stand in the middle of lies and not break. And so they went. The hall that night was grand, golden lights spilling across the floor, chandeliers glittering above. The crowd was filled with the powerful, dressed in their finest. At the front stood the man in the suit, his smile sharp, his voice smooth as he welcomed the stars. Tonight, he announced, we honor not just strength, but sincerity. And what better example than these two men, masters of illusion, who pretend their staged acts are kindness? Laughter echoed through the room, cruel and rehearsed. Screens lit up, showing twisted videos and edited clips, painting Stephen and Keanu as manipulators. The crowd began to murmur. Some shook their heads. Others smirked. The trap was working. But then, something unexpected happened. Daniel, trembling but determined, stepped onto the stage. His voice cracked, but his courage was louder than his fear. "Those videos are lies!" he shouted. "I was there. I was the one who fell. I was the one they helped. They didn't do it for cameras. They did it for me. They saved my life, and later they saved my mother. You can twist their image, but you cannot twist the truth I lived." The room went silent. The man in the suit sneered, trying to wave him away, but Stephen placed a steady hand on Daniel's shoulder and stood before the crowd. His voice carried like thunder. "You say strength is fear. You say power is control. But look at this boy. He stood in front of all of you, knowing you could destroy him, yet he speaks truth. That is strength. And strength like that does not come from fear. It comes from kindness." Then Keanu stepped forward, his eyes calm but piercing. "You want to know what real power is? It is not wealth, it is not fear, it is not pride. Real power is when you kneel to help someone who has fallen, not because it benefits you, but because you cannot walk past their pain. Real power is humanity." The crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers grew. For the first time, doubt cracked the wall of lies. The man in the suit grew desperate. "Don't believe them," he shouted. "They are actors. Everything they do is a performance." But then voices began to rise from the audience, not powerful voices, but ordinary ones. A nurse stood and said, "They stayed with my patient when no one else would." A worker called out, "They brought food to my family when we had nothing." A child's voice rang from the back. "They gave me hope." One by one, stories spilled into the room. Not scripted, not edited, not staged, real voices of real kindness. The man in the suit froze. His weapon of lies was crumbling under the weight of truth. The trap he had built turned into his own downfall. Stephen's gaze locked onto him, not with hate, but with quiet finality. You built your world on fear. We built ours on kindness. And tonight, the world has chosen. The crowd erupted, not in laughter, not in mockery, but in applause that shook the hall. Not the applause of entertainment, but of awakening. The man in the suit slipped away into the shadows, powerless now. His empire of fear had been broken not by fists or violence, but by compassion too strong to bury. Outside, as the night air wrapped around them, Daniel's mother whispered through tears. You risked everything for us. How can we ever repay you? Keanu smiled softly, his voice gentle. By passing it on. Kindness is never ours to keep. It is ours to share. Stephen looked up at the sky, his strong voice steady. Fear will always exist, but if even one hand reaches out in kindness, fear loses ground. That is the fight we live for. In the days that followed, the tide changed. The false stories faded. People began to remember the truth, not the edited lies, but the acts that spoke louder than words. Stephen and Keanu did not claim victory. They did not call themselves heroes. They returned to their quiet lives, still offering kindness where no cameras could see, still reminding the world that strength is not in standing above others, but in kneeling to lift them up. And for Daniel, his life was forever changed. He carried the lesson not only in memory but in action. Every step he took, he tried to honor the men who showed him that kindness was not weakness, but the greatest strength a human could ever hold. The storm had passed, but the message remained. True strength is not in power, fame, or fear. True strength, the kind that survives lies and betrayal, the kind that changes lives and inspires generations, is kindness.